August 9, 216 BC. 50,000 Roman soldiers are about to walk into a slaughter. They don't know it yet. But you do, because history has already written what happens next at a place called Cannae. Hannibal the ghost who crossed the Alps, the tactician who broke Rome's armies like toys, is waiting. His forces are smaller, 40,000 men. But he has a plan so perfect, so devastating, that it will become the gold standard for military annihilation for the next 2,000 years. The Romans march forward, standard formation, disciplined, confident, and then the trap springs. Hannibal's cavalry smashes through the flanks. His infantry bends backward, drawing the Romans deeper into a pocket. Then the African veterans wheel inward. The trap closes. 50,000 Romans are now surrounded, compressed, suffocating in their own ranks. Swords can't swing, shields can't lift. Men are trampled by their own brothers. This is where armies shatter. This is where discipline evaporates into screaming chaos, where command collapses, where soldiers throw down their weapons and run, or freeze, or die. But here's what shouldn't be possible. Even as thousands of Romans are dying, even as the command structure is obliterated, small pockets of legionaries keep fighting. Not panicking, not scattering, fighting, in formation, taking orders. From centurions who refuse to break, some units actually cut their way out of the encirclement. Not many, but enough to prove something supernatural about how these men were built. Rome lost Cannae, lost it catastrophically, 70,000 dead in a single afternoon. But here's the thing history doesn't shout loud enough. Rome didn't surrender, didn't collapse, didn't beg for peace. They went home, buried their dead, and built NEW legions. And those legions, trained by the survivors, commanded by men who learned from the nightmare, those legions came back. And they hunted Hannibal for 15 more years until they cornered him in North Africa and ended him. So ask yourself this: what kind of army loses its worst defeat in history and doesn't break? What kind of system can absorb that level of catastrophic trauma and keep functioning? You're thinking it was the generals, right? Some brilliant strategic mind who held it all together. Wrong. It wasn't the generals. It wasn't one man's genius. It wasn't even Roman virtue or whatever propaganda they carved into marble. It was something far more terrifying, something deliberately designed, something that made Roman armies almost impossible to shatter even when every logical reason said they should collapse into chaos. Want to know what it was? Because once you see it, you'll understand why Rome conquered the known world, why their enemies, Gauls, Greeks, Carthaginians, Parthians, could win battles but couldn't break the machine, why Roman legions could lose commanders, lose formations, lose entire units, and still keep fighting like nothing happened. The answer isn't in the history books, the way you think. It's in the structure, the command architecture, the invisible skeleton that held the legion together when everything else was burning. And it starts with a question nobody asks: who actually commanded a Roman army when the general was dead? Think about it. Every other ancient army, Persian, Greek, Celtic, Carthaginian, ran on the same basic model. Great leader at the top, everyone else follows. If that leader falls, army scatters. If he makes a mistake, army pays. If he's brilliant, army wins. One man, one brain, one point of failure. Rome looked at that system and said, unacceptable. Because Rome's entire military philosophy was built on one cold, brutal truth that Polybius, the Greek historian who actually watched Roman legions operate, spelled out perfectly. In war, you don't get excuses. Read that again. You don't get excuses. Your general got killed? Not an excuse. Your tribune is wounded? Not an excuse. Chaos? Confusion? Enemy doing something unexpected? None of it matters. The legion still has to function, still has to fight, still has to win. So Rome engineered a solution that sounds impossible. What if we built an army that couldn't lose its command structure? What if we made leadership so redundant, so layered, so pushed down into the bones of every unit that cutting off the head didn't kill the body? What if we designed an army that was unbreakable by design? That's what you're about to see. Not the myth, not the propaganda. The actual structural mechanics of how Rome built a military machine that could absorb punishment, that would annihilate any other force and keep marching. This is the command structure that made Roman armies unbreakable. And it starts with something nobody talks about. The thing nobody tells you about Roman command is this: it wasn't romantic. There was no chosen one. No Alexander the Great charging ahead on his horse, personally deciding every move, being the singular genius everyone depended on. Rome looked at that model and saw a fatal flaw. What happens when your genius has a bad day? So they built something colder, something bureaucratic, something that sounds boring until you realize it made them unstoppable. They made command legal. Here's what that means. In the Roman Republic, you couldn't just decide you were in charge of an army because you were good at fighting or charismatic or brave. You needed imperium, the legal authority granted by the state to command military forces. Consuls had it. Praetors had it. And it came with something terrifying: absolute power over life and death within your jurisdiction. But here's the genius part: imperium wasn't just about authority. It was about accountability. A Roman commander wasn't a warlord. He was an officer of the Republic, appointed, term-limited, answerable to the Senate. If he lost badly enough, he could be prosecuted, stripped of status, exiled, executed. That changes everything, because it meant Roman generals couldn't afford to throw armies away on ego, couldn't afford to fight for personal glory if it meant losing the legion. The legion wasn't theirs. It belonged to Rome, and Rome was watching. So right away, Rome solved the problem that destroyed other empires: warlords who treated armies like personal property. But legal authority at the top is just the first layer. Because here's the question: who actually ran the army day to day? You're imagining the consul, right? Standing on a hill, pointing dramatically, shouting orders. Wrong again. The consul set the intent, the strategy, the big picture. We're marching here, we're attacking there. But d'actual execution, the training, the discipline, the moment-to-moment command in the blood and chaos of battle, that was someone else entirely. Enter the military tribunes. These weren't random aristocrats playing soldier. Rome had a formal selection process. Polybius describes it in detail: years of service required, experience standards, appointment procedures. These men were the senior officer corps, and they had to know what they were doing because the legion's survival depended on it. But even tribunes weren't the secret. Because here's what's insane. Rome built another layer under them, a professional continuity role that almost nobody talks about but was absolutely critical to why legions didn't collapse when leadership rotated. The praefectus castrorum, the camp prefect. Listen to what this job actually was: a veteran who'd risen through the ranks, not an aristocrat, not a politician, a professional soldier who handled training standards, equipment readiness, camp construction, logistics, and operational continuity. Why does this matter? Because Roman commanders rotated. Consuls served one-year terms. Tribunes came and went. But the camp prefect, he was the institutional memory, the man who knew how the legion actually worked, the bridge between the elite officers at the top and the fighting men below. This is the layer that made Roman armies resilient across time. A legion didn't reset to zero every time a new commander arrived. The systems kept running, the standards stayed consistent. But we're still not at the real answer yet. Because all of this, the legal authority, the officer corps, the professional logistics layer, all of it is just scaffolding. The actual skeleton of the legion, the thing that made it unbreakable, it was 80 men deep. Let me show you what I mean. Picture a battle. Not the clean, organized version you see in movies. The real thing. Dust. Screaming. Metal crushing on metal. Someone just shoved a spear through your friend's throat, and now he's choking on blood at your feet. The enemy is pushing. Your line is bending. You can't see the general, can't hear orders, can't tell if you're winning or losing. This is the moment. This is where armies break. This is where panic spreads like fire, and suddenly every man is thinking the same thought: run. And in that moment, that single moment where everything hangs by a thread, there's only one thing that matters. Is there someone you trust standing right next to you, telling you to hold? For most ancient armies, the answer was no, or maybe, or sometimes. For Rome, the answer was always, because Rome put its best leaders exactly there, right in the formation, right at the point of crisis. They called them centurions. And if you want the real answer to why Roman armies were unbreakable, if you want the one-word explanation for how Rome conquered the Mediterranean, while other empires collapsed. It's this: centurions. Not the generals, not the consuls, not the brilliant tactics you read about in history books, the centurions. Let me tell you what made them different. First, Rome assigned 2 centurions to many units, not 1. 2. Why? Polybius explains it with brutal clarity: because you can't predict what will happen to an officer in battle. One gets killed, the other takes full command. One is wounded, the other steps up. One is separated from the unit, the other is still there. The unit always has a brain. Do you understand how insane that is? Rome looked at the chaos of war and said, we're going to engineer around unpredictability. We're going to make leadership redundant at the squad level. That's not ancient thinking. That's modern systems design. That's fault tolerance built into human command structure. But it gets better. Second, Rome didn't pick centurions based on who was bravest or most aggressive. They picked men who were steady. Polybius is crystal clear on this. Rome wanted centurions who were good at command and who would hold their ground under pressure. Not daredevils, not glory seekers. Men who could stand in the pocket when everything was collapsing and radiate one message to the soldiers around them: we are holding. You want to know what steady looks like in the middle of a nightmare? Picture this. You're a Roman legionary, 18 years old. This is your first real battle. You've trained for months, but training doesn't prepare you for the sound, the actual screaming, metal-breaking bones sound of 2 armies colliding at full speed. The enemy hits your line like a hammer. Your shield arm is already numb from the impact. The man to your left just went down. You don't know if he's dead or wounded, and you don't have time to check, because there's a Gallic warrior twice your size trying to split your skull open with an axe. Your heart is trying to explode out of your chest. Every instinct is screaming RUN. And then you hear it, a voice, cutting through the chaos. Not panicked, not screaming, cold, commanding, absolute. Hold the line. You glance right. There he is, your centurion, standing in the formation, not behind you, not safely in the rear. Right there, sword drawn, vine staff in his other hand, his crest marking him as a target for every enemy warrior looking for glory. And he's not moving. He's not flinching. He's a wall. And because he's not breaking, you don't break. The man next to you doesn't break. The entire century 80 men who are all terrified, all exhausted, all wanting to run, they hold. Because the centurion holds. That's what steadiness does. That's what Rome engineered into its command structure at the most critical level. But here's what makes it even more devastating. Rome didn't just put one leader there and hope for the best. They built a micro-chain of command inside each century. Under the centurion, you had the optio, the deputy. If the centurion went down, the optio immediately took over. No confusion, no debate, no moment where the unit looked around, wondering who was in charge. Under the optio, you had specialists, Signifer carrying the standard, Tesserarius handling passwords and guard duties. Every role designed to make the century function as a controllable block. What Rome created was a unit that couldn't become leaderless. Even if you killed the centurion, even if you somehow took out both centurions and the optio, the century still had structure, still had voices men recognized, still had someone who could shout hold and make it stick. This is why Roman armies didn't shatter like everyone else. Because panic spreads at the squad level, 80 to 100 men. That's where battles are actually decided, not in the general's tent, not in the grand strategy, in the blood and terror of close combat, where one unit breaking can cascade into an entire army routing. Rome put its best, keep formation leadership exactly there. They put men who'd proven themselves steady, who'd survived battles, who knew what panic looked like and could stare it down, and they gave them the authority to enforce it. Let's talk about that authority for a second, because this is where people get uncomfortable. The centurion carried a vitis, a vine staff, symbol of his rank. But it wasn't just ceremonial. Ancient sources are clear. Centurions used that staff to enforce discipline, to beat soldiers who broke formation, to make commands real when adrenaline and fear were drowning out reason. Modern people hear that and think brutality, abuse, evil. But here's the thing you need to understand. In the chaos of battle, when men are dying and every instinct says scatter, Abstract authority means nothing. A centurion couldn't just politely suggest you hold the line. He needed to be more terrifying than the enemy. He needed you to know bone deep, no doubt certainty, that breaking formation would cost you more than standing and fighting. That's not cruelty. That's battlefield psychology. That's Rome understanding something dark and true about human nature. In moments of existential terror, people need concrete consequences. They need to know the rules are real. The Vitus made them real. And before you judge too harshly, remember this: those same centurions stood in the front, took the same risks, died at higher rates than the men they commanded. They weren't tyrants hiding in safety. They were leaders who said, "I will make you stand, and I will stand with you." That combination, steadiness plus authority plus shared risk, created something unbreakable. But we still haven't answered the deepest question. What happened when things went really wrong? When the plan collapsed? When the general was killed or surrounded? When the battle turned into a confused mess, when nobody could see what was happening 50 feet away? This is where every other ancient army fell apart, because most armies were centralized, top-down. The general made decisions, messengers carried orders, units obeyed. But what if messengers can't get through? What if orders don't make sense anymore because the situation changed? What if the general is dead? Rome had an answer, and it's so elegant, so modern in its thinking, that it's hard to believe it came from 2,000 years ago. Rome decentralized on purpose. The general set the intent, the broad objective. We're holding this position. We're pushing their left flank. We're breaking through to the supply line. But the execution, that was pushed down to the centurions. Each sentry was a semi-autonomous unit. The centurion had the authority to make tactical decisions in the moment, to adapt, to respond to what was actually happening in front of him without waiting for permission from above. So when things got messy, and in war, things always get messy, the Roman army didn't become leaderless chaos. It became many small problems being handled locally. A sentry is taking heavy casualties. The centurion shifts formation, tightens the line, calls for the optio to fill gaps. Enemy breaks through on the flank. The nearest centurion wheels his unit to plug it without waiting for orders from a tribune who might not even know it happened yet. General goes down? Doesn't matter. The centurions keep their units fighting, keep the line coherent, keep pressure on the enemy. The legion continues to function. Polybius calls this Rome's never without a leader design, and he frames it as Rome openly admitting, battlefields are messy, unpredictable, so we engineer around that. We make the system resilient. Now here's where it gets terrifying, because what Rome built wasn't just a military structure, it was a machine that could learn, could adapt, could get better even when it was losing. Let me show you what that looks like in practice. Year 105 BC, place called Arausio, modern-day Orange in southern France. Rome is fighting a coalition of Germanic tribes, Cimbri and Teutones, massive warriors, savage fighters. They've been carving through Roman territory like a hot knife through wax. 2 Roman armies marched to stop them. 80,000 soldiers, should be overwhelming force. But the 2 commanders hate each other, refuse to coordinate. Their armies camp separately, won't share intelligence, won't combine formations. The Germans see the opening and attack. What happens next is apocalyptic. 80,000 Romans, dead or enslaved, in a single day. It's the worst military disaster in Roman history since Cannae. Maybe worse. The entire region is open. Italy itself is vulnerable. Germanic tribes are flooding south and Rome has nothing to stop them. This is where empires collapse. This is where the Senate panics, sues for peace, pays tribute, and watches their empire crumble. But Rome doesn't do that. Instead, they promote a general named Gaius Marius. And Marius does something that sounds insane. He tears apart the legion structure and rebuilds it. Wait, didn't we just spend this whole time talking about how Rome's command structure was the secret weapon? Yes. But here's the thing, the structure wasn't static, it wasn't sacred. Rome didn't worship tradition for its own sake. When something didn't work, they changed it. Marius looks at what happened at Arausio and identifies the problem. The legion is still too dependent on aristocratic commanders who might be incompetent, who might be rivals, who might put personal glory above the legion's survival. So Marius doubles down on professionalization. He standardizes equipment across all legionaries. No more wealthy soldiers with better gear. Everyone gets the same kit. Same weapons. Same armor. Same training. Why? Because it makes units interchangeable. A sentry from one legion can slot into another legion without missing a beat. Reinforcements integrate seamlessly. The army becomes modular. But more importantly, Marius elevates the centurion system even further. He extends service terms, makes the army a career for common soldiers, creates a path where a talented fighter from nowhere can rise to centurion through merit and experience. This changes everything, because now you're not just getting steady leaders at the century level, you're getting veteran leaders. Men who've served 10, 15, 20 years, who've seen every kind of battle, who've survived disasters and learned from them. And those men, those professional centurions, they become the true backbone of the legion. The generals can still be political appointees, can still be aristocrats with minimal combat experience. Doesn't matter, because the centurions know what they're doing. And they're the ones actually commanding the men in battle. Marius takes his reformed legions north, and over the next 5 years, he systematically hunts down and destroys the Germanic tribes that annihilated Rome at Arausio. Same enemy, same savage warriors. But this time, Rome's command structure is even more resilient, even more decentralized, even more unbreakable. The Cimbri and Teutones are wiped out, and Rome learns the lesson. Professional soldiers with experienced leaders beat everything. Boot white. There's still a missing piece, because we've talked about command in battle, but Roman legions didn't just fight, they marched, for months, across hostile territory, through winter, through mountains, through deserts. And every single night, they did something that seems impossible. They built a fortified camp. Not a simple campsite, a fort, ditch, rampart, palisade, guard towers, streets laid out in the same pattern every time, gates positioned identically, command tent in the exact same spot, every single night. Even after a full day's march, even exhausted, even in enemy territory where they might be attacked at any moment. Why? Because the camp was the third pillar of Roman military resilience. And this is where the praefectus castrorum, that camp prefect we mentioned earlier, becomes critical. The camp prefect was responsible for training the legion in fortification, making sure every soldier knew exactly where to dig, how deep, what angle for the rampart, making sure sentries worked in rotation so the camp went up fast. But more than that, the camp prefect maintained standards. When a new commander arrived, he didn't have to figure out how this particular legion operated. Everything was standardized: training routines, equipment checks, camp construction, guard rotations. The legion had institutional knowledge that transcended individual leadership. So if a legate was killed in battle and replaced, the legion didn't stumble. The praefectus castrorum and the centurions kept everything running smoothly while the new commander got up to speed. This is fault tolerance at the organizational level. This is Rome saying, we're not going to let human mortality break our military effectiveness. And the fortified camp itself was a psychological weapon. Think about it from an enemy's perspective. You're a Celtic chieftain. You've been raiding Roman supply lines. You think you've got them on the run. Then night falls. And when the sun rises, there's a fort where empty ground was the night before. Walls, defenses, organized streets, guards on rotation. The Romans didn't just survive the night. They dominated it. You can't surprise them. Can't catch them sleeping. Can't panic them with a night raid. They're not just an army. They're a mobile fortress. A city that moves. How do you fight that? How do you break an enemy that's never vulnerable? You don't. And that's the point. So let's bring it all together. Because by now, you're seeing the pattern. You're seeing how all these pieces lock into place to create something that shouldn't be possible. An army that can't be broken. Not because the soldiers are superhuman. Not because the generals are geniuses. Not because of some mythical Roman virtue. But because Rome engineered resilience into every layer of command. At the top, legal authority, imperium. Power that comes from the state, not personal charisma. Commanders who are accountable, term-limited, answerable to the Senate. Result? No warlords. No generals treating legions as personal property. No catastrophic gambles for personal glory. Second layer, professional officer corps. Military tribunes with experience requirements. The Praefectus Castrorum, maintaining institutional continuity. Standards that persist across leadership changes. Result: the legion doesn't reset to zero when commanders rotate. Knowledge stays. Systems stay. Effectiveness stays. Third layer, the critical layer. Centurions. Redundant leadership at the unit level. 2 centurions per unit, so there's always a brain. Men selected for steadiness, not heroics. Authority to enforce discipline when panic threatens. Positioned right in the formation where they share the risk. Result: the legion can't become leaderless. Panic can't cascade. Units hold even when the battle plan collapses. And the hidden genius: decentralized execution. The general sets intent. The centurions make it happen. When things get messy in war, is always messy. The army doesn't freeze waiting for orders from the top. It adapts locally, each century handling its immediate problem. The whole legion continuing to function even when central command is disrupted. Result: cutting off the head doesn't kill the body. This is the formula. This is what made Roman armies unbreakable. But here's the question you should be asking now. If this system was so perfect, why did Rome eventually fall? Because it did fall. In 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire collapsed. Germanic tribes, the same kind of barbarians Rome had been crushing for centuries, sacked the city and ended the empire. So what happened? Did the command structure fail? Actually, yes and no. The structure held for an impossibly long time. Rome's military system worked for centuries, through civil wars, through catastrophic defeats, through economic collapse, through plague. But here's what Rome couldn't engineer around. The structures only work if you maintain them. By the late empire, Rome had stopped investing in professional centurions, started relying on barbarian, foederati-allied tribal warriors who fought in their own style with their own leaders. The standardized training degraded. The professional continuity broke down. The careful balance between legal authority and field command fractured as generals became warlords again, fighting each other for the throne. Rome didn't lose because the system was flawed. Rome lost because they abandoned the system. They stopped doing the boring, unglamorous work of maintaining professional standards, stopped promoting from within based on merit, stopped enforcing the discipline that made centurions effective. And without those foundations, the resilience evaporated. The legions became like every other ancient army, dependent on the quality of whoever happened to be in command. One great general could win. One bad general could lose everything. The machine broke down. But here's what's haunting. The system worked for longer than almost any military structure in human history. From the Republic through the height of empire, roughly 600 years of military dominance. 6 centuries where Rome's command structure made them nearly unbeatable. Think about that timeline. The United States military is 249 years old. The British Empire's military peak lasted maybe 200 years. The Mongol war machine dominated for 150 years. Rome's system worked for, say, X hundred years. That's not luck. That's not coincidence. That's designed so robust, so well-engineered, that it could survive civil wars, economic collapse, political chaos, and catastrophic military defeats. As long as they maintained the fundamentals: professional centurions, redundant leadership, decentralized execution, institutional continuity, the legions kept winning. And here's the final, chilling lesson. Modern militaries still use this model. The NCO Corps, in every professional military today. That's the centurion system. Small unit leadership by experienced soldiers who've risen through the ranks. Men who can hold units together when officers go down. Who can adapt to chaos without waiting for orders from above. Fault-tolerant command structures. Decentralized execution. Mission-type tactics where you give intent and let local commanders figure out how. That's all from Rome. We're still using a 2,000-year-old playbook because Rome figured out something fundamental about human nature and warfare. You can't prevent chaos. You can't make war clean and predictable. But you can engineer systems that function through chaos. You can build organizations that don't collapse when the plan fails. You can create resilience by pushing leadership down, building redundancy in, and maintaining professional standards. Rome proved it works. For 600 years, they proved it. And the lesson echoes through history. The unbreakable army isn't the one with the best general. It's the one that keeps fighting when the general is dead. It's the one where every unit has a leader, where every soldier knows someone steady is standing right next to them, where panic can't cascade because centurions are holding the line. That's the command structure that made Roman armies unbreakable. Not invincible, not perfect, not immortal, but resilient in a way no other ancient power could match. They could lose battles, and they did, but they almost never broke, and in the end, that made all the difference.